And that's a threat. That's the dangerous threat because we are not sure what people are using. And then we don't have the resources to do the appropriate testing. We cannot assert it. And when we don't have an early warning system on drugs and a toxicology unit that is equipped with modern technology and equipment so that we could decode and decipher what's going on, we are at our wits' end.
You would be in school, and sometimes you will see certain students looking around with bloodshot eyes, and you're wondering what's happening, and it is very concerning. And for me, it's even more concerning because as we've heard from the anecdotal evidence or that is presented, it said that it's happening from a very very early age.
I remember an incident where just before CXC, a group of the most intelligent students from a particular school had a retreat so that they could, review their material for exam. The brightest group, among the brightest set of students. And it was a subject area that takes a lot of, hard work to achieve. Not like every subject is not important. And during that retreat, one of the youngsters made a cake or a brownie or so and shared. It shows that even among the most so-called intelligent students, that the urge is there as well. So
Now, education officials in Grenada and the rest of the Caribbean say they are deeply concerned about the circulation and distribution of illegal substances, to include alcohol, marijuana-infused foods, and sexual enhancement drugs in secondary schools across the region, including Grenada. Reports suggest that these substances are being brought into school campuses by students, some of whom are distributing or selling them to their peers. Officials say that these drugs pose a significant risk to students' health as well as their behavior and learning outcomes. Of course, in recent times in Grenada, the principal of a secondary school in the St. Andrew Parish released a bulletin on that particular secondary school's website in which they said, quote, manufacturers are becoming increasingly creative in disguising illegal drugs and making them appear harmless to unsuspecting students. Recently, substances such as ecstasy, edibles, honey packs, and flavored vapes have been circulating in schools in the form of candies, cakes, inhalers, and other treats. Of course, the publication goes on to say these drugs are designed to look and taste like regular snacks, but can have serious health consequences. And of course, this will be the very first installment of an episode where we intend to look at this issue. And we're actually happy to be joined by two people who are very familiar with this issue. And one is Miss Elizabeth Japal of the Drug Control Secretariat in the Ministry of Education in Grenada, as well as Akeem Bradley Williams, again, not Andy Williams, not to be mistaken with Andy Williams, but he incidentally is also the younger sibling to, of blessed memory, the dearly departed Odette Bess Campbell, was my former boss at the Grenada Broadcasting Network. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of the Bob Report. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
thank you, Dr. Bob. Thank you so much.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Of course, this is a very important topic of conversation. And Ms. Japal, I do want to begin with you from the Ministry of Education, from the Drug Control Secretariat. Of course, we have heard for many years people like Inspector singing, stay away from drugs. We had Mr. I believe, Dave Alexander, who was also doing a lot of that work. And now we have you, and I'm guessing now we will be relying on you. So big picture before we get into the questions that we have here. Can you first and foremost talk about how much of a challenge this issue is for education officials in Grenada? Big picture.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Bob. So I start with a basic overview on the topic, and then, like you said, we would narrow it down and get down to specifics. Now,
Yes.
we must be mindful that the issue of drug use or substance use dates back to prehistorical and ancient civilization. History would tell us that people used drugs way back in time for religious reasons. They use it for medicinal reasons and also for recreational reasons. So the issue is not a new one. It's not a modern one. What is really happening now is that now young people are exposed to even more dangerous drugs. And the people who promote substance use and sale are becoming more crafty in their trade. And that is posing a problem. In addition to all of that, what we are realizing too is that young people, in many instances, are beginning to normalize substance use. So, whereas back in historical era or prehistorical era, or ancient civilization, there may have been not laws and legislation per se, but it may have been guidelines governing who use, when they use, how they use. Now we move into a stage where all and sundry believe they can use, even children who are under the ages of 10, because they are exposed. And the issue of normalizing substance use is what is posing a very difficult problem in our society. And even as we move, and then we're going to get into that later on, but the issue now of synthetic drugs and new, what we call NPSs, new psychoactive substances. Now, one of the days when we just dealt with, I'm not saying that they weren't it's not bad, but when we spoke about alcohol and marijuana, now we are looking at synthetic drugs and new psychoactive substances, of which there, in a recent report from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, or even the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission, where, which two agencies that produce hemispheric drug report, where they look at substance use in the region, the Americas, Europe, etc. And what we are realizing is that more and more young people are using stronger, more potent drugs. And then it's resulting in many more drug-related ailments and psychosis, etc., and resulting in deaths, for example, a drug like fentanyl, which is very deadly. So that is what the scope of what we're dealing with. The nuances of the transition from traditional drugs into new psychoactive
So more
substances.
psychoactive, yeah. Very well. That's interesting. Mr. Williams, let me bring you in. You're Akeem Bradley Williams. Of course, you are a youth parliamentarian representing the constituency of St. George Northeast. And congratulations on the youth election and, of course, being sworn in this week. At the time that this program will be aired, you would have been sworn in. I believe it's the inaugural swearing in that they're having there in Parliament. Now, you know, there is always the perception, you hear that, you know, some of the senior folks, they don't really understand young people, and young people as if, some young people feel as if, you know, senior folks, more seasoned folks with life experiences are patronizing. And so sometimes I think it's also to get a youth perspective, which is why we invited you here. So what do you think motivates some of what Ms. Japal was speaking of there, the attraction to those synthetic drugs? Is it peer pressure? Is it what young people are exposed to on their social media accounts? Of course, now I feel as if websites like TikTok are doing more education, shall we say miseducation, really, informal education, it's not really formal, than the traditional school systems. So talk to us about the types of influences that are occurring that will push a young person to want to engage with the synthetic drugs here that Ms. Japal spoke about.
So thank you, Dr. I think it's quite important, and we would appreciate that. I think this is where sometimes the younger version of the population and the older version tend to not agree on some things. One would appreciate that as young people, we see the world and we experience the world through a slightly different lens. Our experiences are different, the culture around us is different. And yes, we see from time to time that our parents would say, you know what, when I was young, this was the case with me and this is the experience. But we would appreciate that the world we live in today is a completely different world than it was many years ago. To start off from this, I think what we have noticed is that we have seen that we have gotten to a place where the stigma, we have gotten very desensitized in many respects, as you mentioned, to what was considered a negative outlook on drugs. So we have gotten to a place where one, it's either more promoted because now we have the social media, we have the TikTok, we have the Instagram, we have the Facebook, and the different platforms that are promoting it. To add insult to injury, we are a people of music, we are a people of dance, we are a people of rhythm and culture. And we have also seen, and when we've looked at the evidence, we've seen that these different things, when they infiltrate themselves into our culture, our morphed or evolved culture as young people within the Grenadian context, we have seen that it has now smoothened the outlook, and has made it very easy and attractable for young persons to want to participate. So one of the days when for our parents, we hear the stories of their parents threatening them and making it look as this is such a dangerous thing. Now we have way more access to information. And so you find that with our young people, we have to go this step further than to just say to them that you shouldn't have it or this isn't necessarily good. We have to get down into the crux, into the details, and we have to educate. I think that's one of the big things. I'm a big advocate for what the culture has gotten to. And sadly, it appears as though by nature of where we're located in the world between North and South America, it seemed to appear as though that we are a lot of collateral damage for the transiting of those drugs across the globe.
And let me bring back Mr. Pal here. Of course, you heard Mr. Bradley Williams here saying that we are sort of in between North and South America, that transit point for narcotics and things like that, and we have become collateral damage. Is that a sentiment that you associate yourself with, Ms. Japal? Is that a sentiment you agree with? Yes.
That definitely the issue of our porous borders, falling like my brother said, between North and South America, Caribbean islands being used as transshipment centers. Of course, we are most vulnerable for the emergence of all these new drugs. And in addition to that, we are still considered somewhat third world countries. So
Yeah.
many times we would hope that the information that we really need is reaching us, and we are not like just recipients of pop culture. So we've
Yeah.
in there for the most part, many times, we seem not to want to hold on to our own cultural identity, but want to adapt and associate with the popular culture. And as a result of that, like it was mentioned, the popular music, the new genre of music, which if one would look, one just has to look at any one of the music videos, and promotion of violence and crime and risky sexual behavior, and of course, substance use.
Yeah, yeah. So, Mr. Pal, let us pick up on something you said earlier, and that has to do with the nature of the synthetic drugs. You mentioned this is the synthetic drugs and how different it is to traditional substance use and things like that. What should folks be looking out for? Because I saw that circular from one of the schools, and again, we are not here in the business of stigmatizing schools, because I think there is a tendency to think that some schools do it and others don't. Let us not be hypocritical. It happens everywhere. Some of your children are underneath parents. Okay, I'm going to use that word. But let us talk about who are supplying these things. Are these spin-offs from the traditional drug suppliers? Who is supplying them, and what should parents be looking out for?
Right. So I would get to that, but I'm happy that you mentioned it's not any one school, because many
Yes.
times we are in denial as to the school. Some we have reporting, sometimes we have underreporting, and then in all fairness to some school administration, sometimes they just don't know. But I often say to people in my how many years, 15 years of being in the drug control secretariat, I cannot say that there has been one school that has been spared from the tentacles of the drug phenomenon. Like I say, in some cases there's underreporting, in some cases maybe some people know and others don't, but for the most part, every school is affected. And I remember being at a workshop, it must have been in Europe or South America, and nothing has remained with me than what that special line that the presenter said. He said, drugs can be anything, it is everywhere, and it affects everyone. So even if it may not affect you, Dr. Bob, directly, you may know someone, a neighbor, a family member or so, who is affected by the issue of substance use and misuse and drug dependency. So you might ask, what should parents be looking out for? I think that's the question you just asked.
Yes.
What should we be looking out for? Because the dealers of the proponents of substance sales and trafficking and so, they have become very crafty. They are using non-traditional methods such as, well, the post to a certain extent, but even more so the online methods of the dark web and the deep net, or the deep, or vice versa. So a lot of
Yeah.
us older parents who are not very au fait with the technology, we can be left behind because our children might be, online, seem to be doing something that seems natural and normal, and we're not aware that they're actually involved in some deep dark activity. So the issue of drugs via sales via the internet is one of the emerging trends where we, the older heads, are getting left behind because we're not sure what they're doing, we're not sure what they're looking at. And like I said, these people who are, involved in the trade, they know how to capture the audience of the young people. They know how to coerce them. They know how to get into the psyche and make them believe what they want them to believe, inclusive of they make them believe that there's some benefits to the issue of substance use when really there isn't. So we have moved away, like I said, from the traditional into these new substances, which can be anything. Because when you speak about new psychoactive substances, or and you're talking about over 800, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime report of 2021, there were over 800 such drugs. Now, how do you come up with 800 new drugs? And it all has to do with is that you're using chemicals and substances that may normally be used maybe in the home, maybe as paint products, etc. And these substances now then are done what we call adulterated, mixed with other substances to create these new drugs. And most times, parents, us, we the adults, we may be the last ones to know because we don't know what to look for. Let's take, for example, the issue of electronic cigarettes and vapes. We're in the era of technology, so students have their thumb drives or their flash drives, etc. As a parent, you might see the strange looking object and you think, oh, it's a flash drive, but it might just be a vaping
With the
device.
SBAs on it, and they will tell you they have the SBAs
They
on
have
it,
the
right?
SBS, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's
Go
like
ahead.
you're between a rock and a hard place. You want them to do their work, but you're not sure if that's what they're doing is really what they're supposed to be doing. Because, like I said, the new phenomenon, the new nuances of the way things are done, it's very difficult. And even for governments to come up with um, legislations and restrictions and all of that, how do you even pinpoint these drugs? And that brings me to another issue of the early warning systems. If in countries like us, we do not have what is called a early warning system on drugs, where our ER unit and our police unit, drug squad, etc., the drug control secretariat, the Ministry of Health, if we don't have the mechanism and the technology to decipher and decode, then we are left on the back burner while the world continues to spin around in this negative issue.
And that's a very important point that you make there in respect of the divide. There is a digital divide in respect of understanding of how young people use their devices, and many times, parents just give them, the phones and say, "Oh my goodness, he can juke this button," and and well, that's what they're showing you. They're not showing you anything else. But I want to bring back Mr. Williams here. Mr. Williams, I want you to also speak to the whole issue of the music. And of course, both of you mentioned the music here. Now, one of the bigger influences now, in my day, we had dancehall, we had the Red Rat, and we had the Buju Banton. But now, these young people have the Cayman 6. Now, dancehall, of course, has always been dancehall in respect of what it was promoting. But Cayman 6, that musical influence, seemed to also be connected to those vices that we're talking about today as well.
And that's one aspect, because I mean there are those who young persons among us who would be drawn to the dance or the Trinidad dance or that kind of a culture. But we still have a rich young population who is very much drawn to American hip hop. And again, it's no secret that a lot of these songs, because they play in our minds. I remember if you would turn to one of the old songs from Rashot, it says what we feel our mind becomes our characteristic, and I think that shows because music doesn't ask for permission. You hear a beat, anyone else, we're Caribbean people, and before a beat comes, um,
Yeah.
we flow with it automatically. So it means that music is actually getting you to do something without your invitation or you giving it permission at all. So when we then come and add lyrics on that, we now have a vehicle and a medium that is bringing forward a message that if I want to speak it or somebody were to speak it or transmit it to you, it wouldn't do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the dangerous thing that we've gotten to. So gone are the days. I remember that our musicians and the persons who were involved in the culture at the time, there was a lot of effort placed on ensuring that there were guardrails and there were barriers and there were boundaries separating so that what was adult entertainment and accept the fact adult mind was somehow not necessarily dispensed to a younger generation. So much so that you would find that young persons, after they've grown old, when they've fully discovered what it meant, they're shocked. No, we no longer having that. It's coming as raw. It's coming as it is to a generation that is readily available. Now, one of the pressing things I think why we are in a bit of a rut is simply because, and I've been drawn to this Ubuntu philosophy as of recent. I am because
Because we are. Yes. Amen to that.
when we look at our culture, so technology is only part of it. When we look at our culture, you will realize that more and more, and year after year, our culture is moving away from that sense of community, and we're
Mm-hmm.
moving into that sense of individualism. So
Mm-hmm.
whereas it took the community and it took those in the community who maybe are sharper minds to look out and to pay attention, everyone is looking after their own selves. So no longer do we have that all of society approach. Those guardrails, those foundations were there, those unspoken rules and regulations within our society that ensure that kept young persons focused on the straight and narrow. We've moved. So now persons no longer want to tell their child. So people might be aware that this is happening, but they probably won't say anything. So yes,
Mm-hmm.
not only do we have the infiltration of the media, the popular culture, not
Yeah.
only do we see it being easily accessible and being normalized in the music, but no, there is nothing preventing it. So what I like to say is that in some respects, we have lost our culture because we have not put enough effort, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, to preserve those societal foundation that kept our society going. Instead, we have
Mm-hmm.
imported a North American or a Western culture that doesn't seem to be serving us in any form or fashion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I will bring back Ms. Japal here. Ms. Japal, in all of the work and research you've been doing, have you been seeing a correlation between the music and drug use?
Right. So, Dr. Bob, in my line of work, our line of work in drug control, we are guided by what we call evidence and scientific data. So, it would be remiss of me to sit here and use anecdotal reporting to
Mm-hmm.
arrive to answer your question.
Yes.
However, I think anecdotal information probably could be the zero point 0.1 or zero point 0.0 towards the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of empirical evidence, outside of scientific data, outside of research, as a drug control officer, I cannot discuss the correlation. The correlation I can discuss is that of anecdotal reporting. And of course,
Report. Yes.
we're in the environment, we're not sitting outside of the environment. And that's where research becomes very important. So we talk about current data, we talk about data that is relevant, data that is credible, data that can be validated. And when you put all these words together, then you come up with evidence-based research. And outside of the proper methodologies to find out what is going on, we cannot say for sure, even if it seems to be staring us in the eye. And that's why I'm saying again, it's very important that we liaise with our academic institutions especially in small island developing states like ours, where we cannot readily fund research, then we have to liaise with our academic institutions, partner with other agencies, and that's why we look at the interagency or interagency coordination or cooperation. Because, like my brother just said, Mr. Williams, no one agency, no one unit, no one department can deal with this, the myriad and the plethora of issues that are associated with the phenomenon of drug use. It is not just about ingesting drugs and becoming dependent, but then it spirals into other things. Just this week, a parent called and she's saying, look, her son, who is a fourth former, is behaving out of character, and he's even physically harming his younger siblings, because when you use drugs, it leads to anxiety, it leads to depression, it causes other things to happen in your brain, it leads to psychosis. And as a result, we have to have the appropriate intervention to deal with this. So initially we talk to schools, we say, okay, let's deal with the universal prevention, where from a very young age, I'm thinking maybe we should start as young as preschool and let children know that the dangers of substances to their body. Because by the time they enter higher level primary school or low level secondary school and they're already involved, then we have to look at now specific and indicated prevention methods. And sometimes by that time it's too late, because the issue with substance use is that it has a lot to do with people's tolerance. So for one person, a child might use substance and you may never know. Another one, from that initial experimentation, they come down with a psychosis, which could lead to lifetime dependency or even death. And this is why this is such a intricate matter. This is why it is so important that we continue our primary prevention, universal prevention method, and also incorporate the entire ecological model. When we speak about substance use, we look at the individual. What can happen to that person? What if that person is already genetically predisposed for drug psychosis because of their genetic makeup? But then we can't look at the individual in isolation. The individual come from a home. What is the modus operandi of the home? In some cases, children I have worked with children before that said, Miss, I didn't know it was wrong to bring marijuana in school. At home, we cook marijuana with rice. That's a normal staple. So then you have to get into the psyche and let the child know that what you're doing is not acceptable in school. I have had parents say to me, I didn't mind him smoking, but you drinking? So then what about the parents who normalize smoking? But see, Dr. Bob, I see you opening your eyes. These are some of the issues
that is shocking to me.
Exactly. So it's a lot, it's a marathon, and that's what we say. The issue of drug is multidimensional, it's multifaceted, and therefore we need a interagency, all on sundry, all hands on deck, the community, the home, the institutions, all of society, for us to come together to address the issue. The drug control secretary alone with its two officers will not be able, and I would say will not be able, even in my wildest imagination, will not be able to do it alone. We must include all our agencies. Like Mr. Williams said, there was days when the grandparents would look and the neighbor would looking and look out for your child. And we have to go back to these days, because again, as I interface with the region and the international community, whether Europe, South America, etc., you can become despondent because you hear the issues and it's all over, and you wonder, is there something that we are not doing correctly? And it brings you to the point that no one group can do it. We all have to come together. Like I say, look at the levels of prevention, and if we start with the primary prevention, where you introduce a topic to young people when they are very young, as to how young they should be, that's another debate. It's very debatable. But if you introduce it to them, that's how they know if they climb a tree and they're not careful, they would fall. Or if they put their hands in fire, they'll get burnt. Then I think we need to start the education way earlier, because trust me, Dr. Bob, when they get to the point that they're already using and they're already dependent, and again, I want to stress here that we avoid using the word addiction. We speak about drug dependency and problematic substance use, and we use those kind of terms. When it gets to that stage, especially in cultures and societies and countries like ours, where we do not have a comprehensive drug unit, drug treatment
Mhm.
unit, then it becomes very difficult for us to um, help the people that we need to help, because then we need to talk about tertiary prevention, which is treatment, and that can be very difficult. So I believe in
Mhm.
the universal prevention, primary prevention, before they start even using or introduced, so that they will develop the skills to say no, and know how to say no in a meaningful way.
Mhm. And I just want to quote. I just want to quote from the Minister of National Security in Trinidad and Tobago or neighboring jurisdiction, and this is what he said in my research for this program, and this was in 2023. He said, from data available to us for the period January 2018 to December 2021, there was 7,000 or so drug-related arrests and persons as young as 15 years convicted of these charges. He then goes on to say, and that was very disturbing to me. He said, I have confirmed the report that there are children of this nation as young as 8, 9, and 10 years old who are on the streets at the wee hours of the night and morning, and who are already engaged in the use of marijuana, gambling, using alcohol. Even those are the ages in Trinidad and Tobago, I'm sure in other parts of the world, unquote. Of course, that's the Minister of National Security in Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, this is not in Grenada, but that's in our neighboring country. Any thoughts on that?
Dr. Bum, like they say, if your neighbor's house is on fire, wet tears. The data that we collect in Grenada at the Drug Control Secretariat, there are really little difference to any of our neighboring territories, whether it's St. Vincent, St.
Mhm.
Lucia, Dominica, Grenada.
Mhm.
There's a lot of synergy in what we are seeing. And that's why it's very scary, because how far away is Trinidad from us? 35 minutes on an airline, on a plane to get there.
Yeah.
So sometimes, like I say, if we do not carry the relevant research, we may not know. And to carry the relevant research, we need the relevant resources, the human resource, the budgetary allocation, etc., so that we can do that. Our last school survey dates back to 2013, when the entire CARICOM region we all did this secondary school drug prevalence survey. It costs a lot to do nationwide survey. So the office, my unit, has recently engaged with the UNDP Carry Secure project, and we were looking to carry out a school survey again in the 2025. But the funding was partially government of Grenada, supported by the UNDP. And needless to say, what I'm sure you know about the narrative, where the
Yeah.
US has put a 90-day hold on all the spending and all of that. It just might mean that we may not even be able to carry out the research to find out what's going on. And that's troubling. Because, like I said,
Mhm.
anecdotal reports are showing us that not only are our young children exposed to marijuana and alcohol and probably cocaine like in the past, but they're now exposed to all these new synthetic substances. They're now exposed to new psychoactive substances that affect their brains. And in some instances, and for some children, it takes that very first experimentation to cause them to end up with a drug induced psychosis. It's not about, okay, after my fifth time or my 10th time. For some young people and some adults as well, the very first time they experiment with a drug, they end up with a drug induced psychosis. In
Mhm.
addition to that, even when sometimes young people think they're using one drug, they don't know. Most drugs are adulterated, or we say infused with other substances. So, as a Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime gathers data from the Trinidad, Grenada, all of us, and put together for an atmospheric report, there are very few differences in what obtains in the region. In that, you carry out a survey, you ask young people, what drug, why are you here for treatment? What is the drug you're using? And the person might say, okay, cocaine, or they might say marijuana, or they might say, I use alcohol. But little do they know, when a test is done, there are myriad of other substances in there. And that's a threat. That's the dangerous threat, because we are not sure what people are using. And then we don't have the resources to do the appropriate testing. We cannot ascertain. And when we don't have an early warning system on drugs and a toxicology unit that is equipped with, with modern technology and equipment so that we could decode and decipher what's going on, we are at our wits' end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me bring back Mr. Williams. Let me bring you back in here, sir. Let's see. Just give me 1 second. Yes, Mr. Williams, I'm going to bring you back in here, sir. Is there anything else you wish to add to what Ms. Japal just? Ms. Japal's conversation here is so revealing. I'm learning so much about a lot of these patterns and even the perception as well. Mr. Williams, is that consistent with what you've been seeing on the ground as well?
100%. There is no other way to put it. What I'll say is I am not in a school anymore. I'm not working with it, but the reality is that when I was in school, you would wonder how these things are in nighttime when I was in going to time to see, and so you would see these things prevalent in what we call edibles. Very prevalent. All of you would be in school, and sometimes you would see certain students looking around with bloodshot eyes, and you're wondering what's happening, and it is very concerning. And for me, it's even more concerning because as we've heard from the anecdotal evidence or that has presented itself, that it's happening from a very early age. That is the most concerning thing for me, because we know for a fact that when we look at children, one, that it brings us to developing, and the primary purpose for being in school is to be able to grow and to be able to make that contribution. Now, it means therefore that not only are we seeing that might be impairing their ability to learn, as was mentioned by Ms. Chapel. Now we're seeing that from, and now I want to put on my community nutrition hat, because what we see over time is that unless we can make some of us significant intervention, and we don't have the resources, we don't have the facilities to help treat with these things effectively, what we then see is that these can then go all the way to adulthood, and then we have the societal ills. Now we see that children now are the perception that they can't learn, and then there is nothing productive for them to do, and then we have that cycle repeating itself. That to me is one of the big concerning factors. Is always the domino effect of what happens because it's happening so early. The reality, I think, is, and I can go back to when I was a student, is that every household, every family is not the same, and in as much as some parents may try their very best, to bring their children on the street and the narrow and to educate them, sometimes we are going back into a quote-unquote marketplace of learning, where we have different parents who are different able, and Ms. Chapel alluded to it very clearly, in that you can find yourself in an environment, and because one family is used to it and you may not necessarily be used to it, then that curiosity that we know that is innate to us as human beings, and especially in childhood, then shows up on center stage, and then you find that at some point it is tried, and you do not know. That's the weird thing. We cannot look at someone and see where they are mentally. We cannot look and see what's happening with them psychosocially. So we're looking at a person, and in the moment of just experimenting, one experimenting moment, that can be all is required to see it. And that's why I'm concerned.
Let us talk about peer pressure. Now, one of the things in background research on this issue here is that I found, again, anecdotally, that you have young people themselves who are the ones that are introducing a lot of these substances into the school system, right? Again, anecdotally here. Yeah. So it does appear as if there appears to be some buy-in from some of the young people as well. Yeah. That it's that the adults are influencing them, yes, but they in turn become agents of what the adults are doing.
So that comes back to a very popular thing that we hear a lot, and you go to school, and then I'm thinking back to my school days, and I'm thinking back to teachers bringing the who am I question, and the question of values and self-esteem, And oftentimes, because they're your peers, I think we take for granted that our peers may not necessarily know where we weak and they may not see our faults. And we will, as human beings and as young children, we can be quite crafty ourselves. Yeah, I think I think we tend to forget that me being a victim of trying to fit in so many times, because you leave and you come from different houses, and sometimes you leave not knowing. And it can be a simple reason, and sometimes we have parents who might be extra hard on their children. We don't know what the households are, and that's one of the things that we have to consider. So you leave whatever your household you're coming from, and then you're going into an environment where that is who you're associating with. That is who you're drawn to, and then you want to be able to fit in. And in the desire to fit in, you find that this is the condition on the table. If you don't do this, then you're not seen as one of us. You're not seen as cool. But that is something that I think a lot of work still has to be done on. It is very difficult to do with two persons, of course, and we understand the challenge, of course, with Ms. Japel, and so within that secretariat. And so again, I'm going to say it does require an all of society approach from us, specifically outside of the context of illicit drugs. As a nutritionist, I am significantly concerned with the way that alcohol has now infiltrated our society from the very young to the very old. That to me is a significant concern, because as I look at the scientific evidence, and now we see that we have new results from the last Surgeon General, and that's saying that they want to consider putting labels on alcohol because of the type of cancer. Now, what is happening in those moments when you're actively having these things impact with your brain and impact with the time? Because it's same 24 hours in a day that we isolated, focus on the phone. If we're not focused on the phone, we're focused on having a good time and having that social kind of outcome that is then impacting us down the road. That is a big concern for me as a youth parliament representative for St. John Northeast, because that's the future. We can't take for granted that the persons who are going to be affected isn't a potential surgeon who we might need, or a potential doctor or lawyer who we might need. And so I honestly believe, and this is my philosophy, if we see every person, every child in our community as being someone that we can depend on, or see being someone who can make a significant contribution to society, may not be yet, but at some point, because that was my story, then we will care a little bit more, and as the whole of society, we will take a greater initiative to want to make sure that our neighbors' children and those we care about in our surroundings are cared for.
And taking a village to raise, it takes a village to raise a child. I remember back in back in my days growing up, both on four roads. Yes, I spent some time on four roads as well. If I did something wrong in the schoolhouse, before I got home, everybody knew what I did wrong, and I would get punished both in the schoolhouse, on the way to the house, and when I got home. So that's how it was back in the day. But now, if you were to, correct a neighbor's child, don't talk to me, child. Don't talk to me, child. They want to cuss you, and it's a different culture, and you pointed that out. So, Ms. Japal, you just unmute the mic because we were getting an echo from you. But I want us to talk about the whole question of the suppliers and the supply chain and what that looks like, and perhaps the work that the Secretariat does with the Royal Grenada Police Force and community policing and other partners in the community to conduct surveillance, just to see, again, as you said, you're very limited in respect of the resources you have. But again, anecdotally, is there like supply chains? Have people gotten very creative with how they're moving those things around? What are you seeing?
The chain, the network evolve. That young people themselves also engaged in the activity. It's not a certain cohort or those from a particular socioeconomic background. I remember an incident where just before CXC, a group of the most intelligent students from a particular school had a retreat so that they could, review their material for exam. The brightest group, among the brightest set of students. And it was a subject area that takes a lot of, hard work to achieve. Not like every subject is not important. And during that retreat, one of the youngsters made a cake or a brownie or so and shared. It shows that even among the most so-called intelligent students, that the urge is there as well. So we cannot go along the road of labeling, and because you come from this household and because your father was a no good. No. And that's why I'm happy Mr. Williams said we need to treat every single individual with dignity and respect. We need to be mindful that the issue surrounds us all, and it can be right in our household, and sometimes we are the last ones to know.
Yeah.
And we take that all encompassing approach that it could be anybody's child, including mine, and that we need to look out for all the children, the nation's children, then we would know that, okay, the issue is not an isolated issue. So, to answer your question about the network and the chain, it is very complicated because you cannot look at someone and know that they might be involved. The one you might think, oh, this is an A student. This child performs at a high level. This child is involved in most activities at school. This child is a teacher's pet. That might still be the child who's associating with the drug dealer and bringing ganja, marijuana, brownie fudge, whatever it is on the school compound. So yes,
Yeah.
we work along with the Royal Grenada Police Force, especially the Community Relations Department. We do a lot of collaboration. We would go to schools together and share with the students, do presentations, engage the different units. We work along with drug squad. We work along with the financial intelligence unit because there might be an issue where a child suddenly has a lot of money or is exposed to certain material, latest gadget, and you might be wondering where they get it. And that's why I say again, not just the parent, but we all have to be looking out when something looks like it's not right, and something let's dig deeper. And if we're not sure, let's call somebody who might be better able to go deeper and find out what is going on. Because most times we see it. It may not be a glaring red flag, but you see something that looks different. This child suddenly starts coming to school late. This child is in need, but he or she is not taking any kind of, they're not caring much about their parents anymore. This child is leaving school at a certain time, just disappearing. This child is to perform at a top level, but now the grades are dropping. So it's not only about the dark lips and the red eyes, because those can be normal. I have red eyes. It doesn't mean I'm smoking, no. So we can't even look at those physical traits, but we have to look deeper as to behavioral changes. What have you seen that is different in this youngster that wasn't so before? And if we can spot these things and identify them early as teachers, as administrators, as community activists, as parents, if we're able to see these things very early, we might be able, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to assist the child. But as it relates to the chain can be anybody. It can be a very young child. It can be male. It can be female. Because gone are the days when we used to think, oh, the boys are the ones drinking and smoking and involved in drugs. The young ladies are also involved. And it's the same throughout the region. As we meet for regional meetings or as we discuss during our in-person or virtual meetings, the nuances are the same. The ages are dropping. When I just started in drug control, we were like the average age of substance use was 13 or 12.5 based on the school survey. But now you're hearing a lot of children younger than that, 8, even as young as 7. And then when we would expose them to things like a shandy carry, because we think, oh, it's just 0.5%, that's nothing. But that's what we ourselves introduce
Yeah.
them to acquire the taste for these substances. And studies have shown that if a person has never experimented or used drugs by the age of 25, there's a high probability that he or she may not. Not that I say it's impossible. But when they start much younger than that, then it becomes way more difficult to treat the issue. When I say treat, not necessarily medicate, but to find appropriate intervention that would work for them, because no one method works for no one child. And when we don't have a health court or we don't have a drug court where we can look at the comprehensive nature of drug use and substance use and not just look at it as an offense, as a criminal offense, and deal with it in a punitive way. But when we start to look at the public health approach and the human rights approach, and start looking at ways we can help our children, then we are really starting to address the issue, hitting the tip of the iceberg. But there's a lot we have to do. And like I said, parents alone cannot do it. The staff of the Drug Control Secretariat alone cannot do it. The Prime Minister alone cannot do it. We all have to come together. Non-governmental organizations, state facilities and organizations, all in surgery, all have to come together and, like I say, be vigilant. When we see things that look a little bit abnormal or it doesn't seem right, let's dig into it. Let's try to find out what's going on so that we can save our population. Because if we don't, we are going to lose them. Because, like I said, the drugs are creeping in. Fentanyl, for example, is very deadly. When at a meeting last year, I heard that in the US and Canada that they had deaths within a year over the population of Grenada, then that scared me because I'm saying to myself, what is this? And again, like I say, if we don't have an early warning system on drugs to identify new and emerging drugs, to be able to treat people and not necessarily medicate, but to do the psycho-educational programs with them and have a comprehensive drug program where you have a psychiatrist, a psychologist, where we have counselors in school, but some of them are stretched thin. And a lot of people think the Drug Control Secretariat is there just to do drug program, but not realizing that we fall under 5 pillars: interagency coordination, institutional strengthening, international cooperation. So we have to meet our mandate to provide our data to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the European Monitoring Center on Drug and Crime, CARICOM, etc. We have a lot to do. So I know we are wrapping up. I don't we're already wrapping up, but I'm still saying that let's all come together, collaborate, coordinate, cooperate, so that we can address this issue and find ways and intervention strategies that will be effective. And like I say again, I believe it stems back to primary prevention. Primary prevention in that before our young ones are even exposed, hopefully, we are able to introduce them to skills that will help them to be able to say no when they need to say no and say yes, and to make healthy choices and wise choices.
Mm-hmm. What should parents and teachers look out for in this issue, and how can they reach the Drug Control Secretariat if they notice a child is behaving untoward?
Yes, if you notice that, of course you can go to your nearest health clinic, because once you start to notice, you may not know it's a psychosis, but you see abnormality in behavior, you can reach to your nearest health clinic, or you can call the chief education officer or your district education officer, and they will then transmit the information to us. We might be able to guide them, because many times a lot of parents don't know that their facilities, limited as it is, we do have some facilities in Grenada. So at the Mungay Health Facility, we have a daily walking clinic that runs from 9 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, and that's more psychoeducational. It doesn't have to do with detoxification and injectables, injections and medications and so on, but psychoeducational. A lot of parents don't know that. But of course, the students would have to be 17 plus. But there is also a day clinic at the General Hospital in St. George's, where if a parent notices that something seems abnormal with a child, they can contact the Mungay facility, and the doctor, they would make a recommendation for this child to see the child psychologist at the General Hospital as well.
Very well. That is good to know. That's very beneficial. Mr. Williams, I'm going to bring you back, sir. Is there anything else you wish to add as we close this segment?
No, I think Ms. Jacqueline did a phenomenal job. She was very clear and articulate. I would only but emphasize that a lot of these things really happen outside of our awareness. And I think as parents, it's a good place to encourage us that not because we're a little older or we're of a different generation doesn't mean that we can't learn. I hear our Prime Minister say that age shouldn't be a restrictor of us learning, and I really want to pause it with that today. There is a lot of information on YouTube. So outside of what we're sharing today, they call it the Great University of YouTube, that you can go on their person will do podcast, and then they will talk about things that you can look to. Some of us may have smart TVs, may have Alexas. Pick up the remote, ask the question, see what you can get. We also have the ministry, and so that's available. But paying attention is the single most important thing that you can do, because what we're actually looking for in most parts, in most cases, by and large, would be those behavior changes, that's going to be outside of the ordinary. Um, I think that we cannot leave the that part to itself. I'm really coming to understand today, these days, actually, that anything that we really just leave for itself tends to go towards disorder. And so now we have a sense of awareness that this is a reality. And so, to parents who have young children, who have young teenagers or young adults in your homes, it's something that you'd want to strengthen that knowledge base on in some way. Any knowledge, I think, will be better at this place than not having any at all. But ultimately, I believe that this is going to put us in a much better position, for the future, and to be able to stand in the gap for those children who we care about.
Mhm. Absolutely. Is that part of your platform? What's your platform on another issue going into the youth parliament?
So going into youth parliament, we really hope to address this root cause issue that I mentioned before, and
Mhm.
it is the lack of community. We went to our community and we realized that this me, myself, and I culture is what has pervaded everything. And so it is my philosophy that, as I mentioned in the beginning, that we can only be because of everyone else playing their part in our society. So
Mhm.
we aim to attack that head on. I believe that any promotion and any activity with the intention of pulling communities together is going to make, even if it's a small dent, but it's going to
Mhm.
make a dent no matter what. And it's still better than us doing nothing and allowing entropy to take place. Any system left to itself will ultimately result in disorder. And so that's the principle that we're going to be moving forward with. Trying to create more avenues, seeing where we can collaborate, who we can talk to. It might mean I may need to pay Ms. Jaffel a visit the office, see how we can collaborate. But
Mhm.
there is work to be done, and it's very much needed.
I'm sure your sister would be very proud of you, sir. Very, very proud of you. I
Thank
can
you.
hear, I can hear now, speaking in my head. Ms. Japal, we'll go over to you now as well for some closing comments.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bob. And my closing comments, I think, will go to parents. Parents, you are the ones that your children live with. You are the first role model. Do not allow someone else to be a role model for your child, because you may not want to know you may not be pleased with the role model that they will select, the social media influencer, or um, a pop artist, a musical artist. You be your child's role model, be that first role model. Monitor the behavior that you want to see in your child. Let them know what are wrong, what the things that are wrong and the things that are right. um, have open communication with them. You do not have to be an expert. Yeah, children really don't want to be bothered about how mommy look or if mommy pretty. When you're young, you just mom when mommy or daddy speak, it's like gospel, and next is your teacher. So I'm speaking to kind of
Yeah.
like parents and teacher. Be a role model, but most of parents be a role model. Monitor activities. That child should not, a young child should not be able to go out and come back as he or she well pleases. This young child should not be at every social activity that everywhere the drum beats, he or she should be there. I remember as a student, I was an athlete back in my day, and you had to be home six. Whether it was intercall, sports meet, and I always had to collect my medal the next day at school because no
Mhm.
excuses for reaching home after 6. So we have to start to reinstill these values in our children. um, Stay informed. Like Mr. Williams mentioned, there's a social media. I mean, not all the information is valid and correct, but there are some sources of good information. Let's you know get some of that. Stay informed, and when you're not sure, ask for help. Reach out to someone. There's always someone there who is willing to help. Like I said, you have your district nurse, you have the community teacher, you have the education officer, you have that elderly lady, that grandmother in the society, in a community that has a wealth of knowledge. Let's tap into these areas and not just isolate ourselves. And let's not hide the issue, because trust me, even if you think it's you alone going through it, you might be shocked to know a lot of us are going through it. We're faced with the issues ourselves. So don't isolate yourself. Don't hide in a corner. Ask for help, and there are people there who are willing to help you. At the Drug Control Secretariat, we're always willing. Like I mentioned, we have limited resources, but we're always ready to direct someone to other sources of information, whether local, regional, international. We're always willing. We pride ourselves on treating every person with dignity and respect, and applying the public health approach and the human rights approach to the issue of substance use. Because fundamentally, substance use is a chronic health disorder. It is not a crime. It is a chronic health disorder which requires a multidimensional approach towards intervention, healing, and recovery.
Ms. Japal and Mr. Williams, thank you so much for appearing on the Bub Report this week. This is a very, very important conversation. Of course, we will be having follow-ups with law enforcement partners, RGPF, and all of that, because this is a whole of society issue. As Mr. Williams, you said, it does take a village, and perhaps we need to really revisit those Ubuntu principles that you speak to there. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for appearing. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bub Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG 10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.